right, good night, good night, good night. Welcome, welcome, welcome to another of our sessions, the Sunday night hat, brought to you from the Evesham Sda Church, and we are here another night. Tonight we got a big topic. We're going to be talking about navigating menopause. Quite a handful, quite a lot we have to discover, and of course, it is definitely one of the topics that I know a lot of my clients personally are dying to hear, learning about, and it's going to be a very important and impactful session for them. But of course, like always, before we begin, let's just bow our heads for a word of prayer. Bow our heads with me, dear Father in heaven. We want to thank you, Lord, for the opportunity to be here tonight, where we can go into your help message, where we can understand from your divine principles and understand this topic tonight, Lord. We know that you have already placed remedies, you have already placed solutions in place so that we can navigate through it. So as we go through the presentation, we just pray for a special unction of your blessings upon us, upon myself, upon Dr. Dean, upon the entire audience here, so that we speak, thus said the Lord, and not our words. Help us to decrease while you increase. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, so good night, good night, good night, good night, everyone. Welcome again to another of our seminars. And of course, we got some stuff tonight. We got some stuff we're gonna go into. We're gonna take our time. I know Dr. Dion is gonna join me shortly. So I'm gonna be the opening batsman while we allow the professional to come on shortly thereafter. So let us start this thing off the right way. Of course, we just want to say welcome to all of our members from the Evesham SDA Church. Just put something in the chat. Let us know where you are joining us from. And the Evesham SDA Church members, just drop something in the chat so we can give you a special shout out and acknowledge your presence, because without you, the foundation members, this thing will not be possible. So we just want to make sure and give you guys a special shout out. I see we have people from the Fitma family on here tonight as well. Drop yourselves in the chat, drop something in the chat. We see we have others from the international community, and it's always good to have you all. So just drop in the chat where you join us from. We have Trinidad in the house. We have St. Vincent, of course, in the house. We have Evesham in the house. I see we have Lakwa there. Let me see who else I see in the chat. Right, I still see some more Evesham. Where else are you signing from? Just drop it in the chat. We always like to give you guys a special shout out before we actually jump into this webinar. So we're gonna start this thing off. Let me see here. I see we have some more Trini in the house again. Looks like that. Evesham, lovely, lovely, lovely. Of course, you gotta represent your home territory. All right, so as we begin, this webinar is for educational purposes only and is not intended to replace medical advice. Please consult your healthcare provider before making any changes to your health routine. Of course, we always got to start it off the right way. So we teach primarily from four sources. The first being the Bible, of course. The second is the inspired writings. When we talk about the inspired writings, we are talking specifically about the inspired writings of the messenger Ellen G. White. And then we teach from good science. Now, good science is simple. It lines up with the Bible and it lines up with the inspired writings. And of course, most importantly, you also teach from experience, because there's things you will see on the field, there's things you will see as you work with clients, as you help clients, and you could also bring that into the teaching or memory text. And God said, Exodus 15:26, and God said, if thou wilt diligently hearken to the voice of the Lord thy God, and will do that which is right in his sight, and will give ear to his commandments, and keep all his statutes, I will put none of these diseases upon thee, which I have brought upon the Egyptians, for I am the Lord that healeth thee. And sometimes persons say, why do you read this text every single time you start? Well, you see, you always, if one of my sources is the Bible, I always have to have something from the Bible to start. Additionally, this specific text is a very comforting text. Why? Because the Lord promises that he will bring healing to us as long as we fulfill our requirements. There are certain requirements that we have to fulfill, and once we fulfill those requirements, God promises that he will bring the healing to us. It also encourages us to realize that, hey, there's no such thing as an incurable disease. And disease, as you will begin to realize, is a sequence of events, disease being the last of that sequence. So if you understand that it is a sequence of events, just like a formula, this plus this equal that, as long as you remove one of those variables, then you will change the end results. And that is the same thing with disease. So this text brings out some hope. I normally use it as hope, comfort, and it's also one of those texts when you are praying for healing for folks that you can show them that, hey, listen, maybe in the past we made some bad decisions in terms of health loss, but as long as we make our changes, as long as we, change the pathway, change the trajectory, then of course we can expect the healing. Of course, we have some foundations that we always follow. Foundation number one is what? Because causeless shall not come. And something I want you guys to start doing with me as we go into these things. When you see these things come up, say them out loud. Why? Because when you say it out loud, it's going to register in your memory. And eventually, you're going to remember these texts when you are going through your trials or you meet people going through their crucibles. And so you can call upon these and it will also help you to gain comfort, gain confidence, knowing that, listen, whatever they're going through has a cure. Lovely. Foundation number two, disease never comes without a cause. And this is something that we mentioned earlier. Now, what is disease? And by now, most of you should be able to repeat this. So say it after me. Let's engage tonight. And we're going to keep this tempo going as we move forward. What is disease? It says that disease is an effort of nature to free the system from conditions that result from a violation of the laws of health. And we see that the sequence again is outlined here. Now the question must be asked, what then are the laws of health? And they are pure air, sunlight, abstemiousness, rest, exercise, proper diet, the use of water, trust in divine power. These are the true remedies. And tonight, I'm going to do it a little bit different, because there was something I was using while I was preparing for this. And I think this guy did an excellent job. Her name, well, it's this guy, and of course, very prominent broadcaster. And then he brought on Dr. Mary Claire. So I'm just going to bring a little bit of it for you, and then we're going to jump into the actual presentation. All right. So let me just bring it up here, and you will just give me a 1 shot. If you're hearing this song, I want to make sure you hear the song. And of course, we're going to go from there. All right. So let's bring it in, and let me make sure the volume is fully set. Here we go.
How do we define menopause?
So the medical definition of menopause, which I have a huge problem with, is 1 year after the final menstrual period. And the reason why I have a problem with it is not everyone has a menstrual period. What if you've had a hysterectomy? What if you have an IUD? What if you've had an ablation or something that's suppressing your periods, PCOS? So for a lot of women and even clinicians, they are struggling to find that diagnosis because it doesn't fit everything. What it represents is something much bigger. Menopause is also 1 day of your life. It is that 1 day, exactly 1 year after your last period, but it represents the end of your ovarian function. Some of us call it ovarian failure, ovarian senescence, but basically what separates males and females is many things separate us. But in my world, we are born with all of our eggs. We have 1 to 2 million at birth. By the time we're 30, most of us are down to about 10%, maybe 120,000. By the time we're 40, we're down to 3% of our egg supply. And the quality is declining as well. So menopause is when you have no more eggs left and therefore no more sex hormone or very little sex hormone production from the ovaries. So estradiol levels will decline less than 1% of your reproductive years. Your progesterone levels will decline as well. Testosterone declines for sure, but we have other ways to produce it. So it's somewhere 50% or less than your healthiest years.
So is it fair to say that we need a redefinition of what menopause is?
I think so. I think defining it as the presence or absence of a period is a mistake.
Is there any consensus about the quote unquote typical age of onset for menopause? And is it changing? I hear a lot about how the onset of puberty is shifting earlier in females. And given that puberty, at least by some definitions, relates to the onset of menses, one could imagine that menopause would be shifting earlier as well.
So the things that determine when we have puberty or not are different than the things that determine when we run out of eggs. Right now in the US, it's the average age of that 1 year after your cycle. So menopause, that one day is about 51 to 52 years old. However, normal is still 45 to 55, and there's a big variation. That curve's pretty wide. Um, Perimenopause begins 7 to 10 years before that last menstrual period.
Wow. Okay. And I say wow because it's the first time I've ever heard a specific number tacked to this word, perimenopause. Maybe we could talk a little bit about perimenopause since it sounds like it represents a transition phase
Yeah.
into official menopause,
Right.
However one chooses to define that. What are some of the, I don't know if I should call them symptoms,
Sure.
or I should just
Well, let me walk you through the endocrinology, and then we can go through symptoms so you
Great.
understand. So, in a normal, healthy menstrual cycle, before menopause ever becomes an issue, the female hormone cycle is a very EKG-like, reproducible monthly rise and fall of estrogen, progesterone, and then the brain hormones LH, FSH, and then GnRH. So, the way it works is our brain in the hypothalamus is has a little sensor in the blood looking for estradiol levels. And when they get low, it sends GnRH down to the pituitary saying, hey, tell the ovaries to start trying to ovulate so we can get more estrogen on board. The process of ovulation is what drives up our estrogen levels, okay? So pituitary sends out the pulses of LH and FSH, which then lead to ovulation. When we reach in perimenopause, the beginning of perimenopause, that critical level of egg supply, those signals don't work as well. We start becoming resistant to the LH and FSH pulsatile surges. So the brain's like, hey, I told you we need more estradiol. And the pituitary is like, I sent the signal. And the brain's like, send more. So we get much higher pulses of FSH. And then finally the ovary kind of is able to get that egg out, but sometimes it's delayed. So we have the timing of that monthly predictable cycle goes awry. Sometimes the periods are closer together, sometimes they're further apart, but also the estrogen and progesterone levels start changing dramatically. We see much higher surges of estradiol than we ever had in our pre-productive years, and then much lower levels underneath. So we end up with this very volatile curve and not predictable at all. We call it in our world the zone of chaos. So it is literal hormonal chaos. What used to look like this, every month is now just insane and very, very, very unpredictable. That is why we don't have a good blood test in perimenopause to make the diagnosis. Those of us in the metaverse use symptoms usually to make the diagnosis, and we rule out other conditions that might overlap. So perimenopause, basically critical threshold. It's a downward trend overall of estradiol, but it is a very chaotic, race till you flatline and bottom out.
I see. So for those listening, your description of the kind of the amplitude of the estrogen surge, it gets much greater in this perimenopause phase. You also mentioned that follicle stimulating hormone, which comes from the pituitary, has to be or somehow is upregulated in this phase because I don't know, is it that the receptors for FSH are somehow not responsive? Or at the level of the ovary, do we know what's happening to the ovary? Is it obviously the signal's getting there, it's not effective, so then the brain is kicking out more FSH. Is it that
So
the
the
ovary
egg
is
quality is poor, and then around each germ cell is the theca cells, which is actually where the estradiol, the whole pathway going from, actually testosterone is converted to estradiol. So that whole pathway, it still will respond, but the cells are just old, is the way that it's been explained to me and from what I've read. I think we need a lot more research in this area because that is how we're going to help women, I think, longer term, is understanding that process better. But, all I learned in school 25 years ago was it's the transition to menopause, the end. The whole endocrinological process, I didn't learn until about 2 years ago.
And my guess is, just based on my understanding of the only recent trend toward emphasizing studies of both female and male, even just mice in mouse models, which is where generally this stuff originates, and then it shifts
Excuse me, I think you're mute. I'm not hearing.
Oh, my humblest of apologies. Right. Thank you very much for pointing that out. Right. So I was just saying that he did a very excellent job there on explaining the process. And so what I want to start off, I'm going to pick up from where she left off there and really run into it. You're going to see why it was super important for us before we actually touch things like menopause, things like fibroids, things like in our common topics, PMOS, which has now changed from PCOS. We had to do an extensive training on hormones because if we didn't understand the basic of hormones, everything that we do hereafter would not have made sense to you. So we had to really go through this and you understand what is estrogen, what is progesterone, the role these play in the cycles, and so forth. So I really like how she explained it with the eggs, and that is one of the key differences with women versus men. Women come into the world with a limited supply of eggs, right? And as she mentioned, the number there being 20 million. Now, as the age starts to race on towards the perimenopause and menopause range, those numbers start coming down. Now, men, on the other hand, could reproduce right up until death. Now, with women, it is cyclic. And you would understand being or just observing why the Lord would do that. Because you do realize that the amount of pressure, the amount of taxation on the body that a pregnancy allows. And I mean, imagine a woman in her 40s, in her 50s, 60s, 70s, 90s going through that. And you could see that after you get close to like the 60s, 70s, that can now become life threatening. So there had to be a cutoff point, and of course, the Lord in His wisdom made it that way. So as this cutoff point comes on, the bodies now start to signaling, hey, the reproductive years are over, and this is what we're going to move now into the recreational years. This is the time you're going to enjoy the time with your grandchildren, you're going to enjoy the time with your spouse, you're coming into retirement, you're going to travel the world, and you're going to go from there. Right? All right. All right. Is there a feedback still coming through? I just want to make sure that you guys are hearing me. I got some information. There's a feedback. Is it? Are you still getting the feedback? Let me know. Right? Just give me the chat. Right? So I'm going to continue. So when that happens now, you see, it is a transition period, and this is one of the key things we want you guys to take away tonight. Menopause is not the end. It's not an end. It's a transition period. Think of it like puberty. So you are a child up to the teenage years, and now you are going to transition into manhood or womanhood. In order to transition, there are certain features that need to be enhanced, that need to be improved, and in some cases that needs to be added to the body. And so once these are in place, then you are now safe to proceed on to adulthood. It is the same thing with menopause. Yes, you have done your reproductive years and you're now getting ready to transition to the other phase of your life. So there are certain things that will not be needed in that phase that we need to now down-regulate and get the body ready for that phase. No, it is the transition period that we need to understand and that we need to learn to navigate. Now, one of the key things that comes very prominent here, and I want to just reiterate it. Remember last week or the week before, we looked at the cycle, and we saw that as we get close to ovulation, where the signal for the egg is released, then we also have estrogen shooting up. Now, what did we say estrogen was for the woman? Basically, that is the hormone that gives her drive. That is also the hormone that helps the skin to become, a lot more tighter. It also helps the curves to come in the right place. And it really propels the woman somewhat like what testosterone does in a man. And then after that day 14, we get the signal for progesterone that's going to calm things down. And it's designed that way to keep that balance going and also have the reproductive process be prepared should not ovulation, should fertilization take place. Now that being said, imagine now the eggs quantity is going down, and as the egg quantity goes down, we also saw she mentioned about the sensitivity or the response of the cell. So now, when it should have been, hey, it's time for estrogen to go up, we're now having the signal sent, but the signal not being received. And so there is this massive blast of information which causes the surges. Now, there are a couple of things that has to be outlined here, and we'll get into it as we go along. Now that we have the base there, these are some of the symptoms that ladies who go through this phase will experience. Now, one of them will be heart palpitations, of course. And remember, as hormones fluctuate up and down, you will have different things happening. Hot flashes. And what you will also notice too, and I'm just going to add this in here. Remember, we talked earlier about the laws of health. The more in violation you are of the laws of health, the rougher this period is. And from talking to a lot of my clients, I realized that this statement is really true. So if you had a very sedentary lifestyle, you ate what you want, you never paid attention to exercise, you're always indoors, your vitamin D levels are chronically low, then when you get into this period, it tends to be hard. However, if you had a more active lifestyle, you paid attention to what you ate, you observe for the best part the laws of health, you'll find that this period becomes a little more easier to transition. So that's also something to note. So for those of you who are not there yet, it is also some encouragement for you that, hey, listen, these things about the laws of health are not just fallibles or fables. These are actually things that will prepare you. And it prepares you not just for menopause, but for every other thing that you'll encounter on this earth, right? So hot flashes, shortness of breath, aches, back pain, osteoporosis, irregular bleeding, decreased libido or sex drive, vaginal dryness. Why? Because remember we talk about estrogen, progesterone, these also signal fluids to be released in the body. However, if these signals are going off, then there is no message being sent, and so you experience these. Mood swings, very big one. What determines your mood? Predominantly your hormones. The way the hormones react, and I think Dr. Dean did an excellent job when she talked about, these things being out of balance and why at some periods you feel like this, other periods you feel like that. And so now we are having an even bigger imbalance. So when we had an estrogen dominance and we had cases like PMS where you have the androgen dominance, you see the moods go out of whack. That's a normal woman before menopause. Now imagine going into menopause and these fluctuations become more erratic. Then you will see why the moods go off, why the moods go on, and you'll have these mood swings. Now, a big thing that happens in this period, and especially for us men, we have to understand. In fact, I have one client going through this period right now, and she's telling me about the hot flashes. She lives in a cold country, AC on full blast, and she hot, 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 hot. And then she becomes cold, 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 and then she comes hot, hot, hot. And so it is a period for different women. They'll have different transition periods. And as men, if we understand this, we'll then realize that, hey, at this period, we have to kind of be a little bit more nurturing, a little bit more sensitive to the stages that they are going through. Yes, sometimes they may hate you for a whole few weeks, and then they will love you again, and then they may hate you again. It is part of the cycle, as we saw. All right, some other is depression, insomnia. Insomnia is a very big one. Frequent urination, incontinence, pain during intercourse, of course, because of the vaginal dryness. So these are some of the symptoms. It doesn't mean that the person going through menopause is going to have all of these, or maybe sometimes they're going through this, they won't even have much of this, right? Again, depending on the individual. But these are some of the things that you will start to experience as you go through this period. Now, Dr. Dion, let me know when you're on, right? So I could pull you in. Let me know when you're on, right? So we're building. Now, as we mentioned, some of the causes of this is a natural decline in the estrogen, progesterone, and of course, this is also something to note. This is predominantly, I've seen it in two clients. Now, in fibroids, okay, all right, I'm just getting some feedback here. Just guys, give me a one in the chat if you are hearing me properly. And if you are not, give me a two. Give me a one in the chat if you guys are hearing me properly, because I'm getting some WhatsApp messages saying persons are hearing feedback. So let me just get this clarified before I continue, because I don't want you to miss the hot topics. All right. So let me know if you guys are hearing me properly. What I'm going to do, I'll just change this to noise removal, and I think that should help. One, okay, I'm getting the ones. So let me know if that echo still comes. I just switch it from the original song to the one. Okay. And Dival, good to see you. Sister Moll, good to see you. Right. Okay, so you guys are there with me still. Lovely, lovely, lovely. Okay, I'm getting the ones. All right, so I think you should not hear that echo now. Now, this is also something I was talking about. So last week we looked at fibroids. Now, in fibroids, sometimes the medical professional would suggest to the individual, especially if they are older in age, closer to 40, 45, especially also when the fibroids keep coming back. Now, we know for sure that the fibroids come up because of high estrogen, and of course, that goes right back to because of the foods we eat and etc. that we looked at. Now, sometimes individuals get fibroids keep coming back, coming back, coming back, coming back. So, what the medical professional will require them or suggest to them is that they do a complete hysterectomy. Now, that means removing the whole, right? And when the hysterectomy happens, it will be the same effect as when the eggs start being released, the triggers start being sent. So there's no eggs, there is no release, and so what happens when the hysterectomy happens, that person goes straight into menopause. Now, the next thing that could cause menopause is HRT, which stands for hormone replacement therapy. Now, think of it like this. If you are getting the hormone signals from a drug medication, what happens to your natural producing factories? They obviously begin to shut down. So when you have HRT, you're getting it from synthetic or outside sources, your natural signals or natural factories shut down, and that could also trigger menopause. And this is something, of course, we need to look at and talk a little bit more. Now, this is something that's going to pay attention. Now, what I want you guys to type for me in the chat. What is one of the hormones that we said that drops drastically during menopause? What is one of the hormones we said that drop drastically during menopause? Starts with E. Let me help you out. I'm giving you the first letter of the answer. Starts with E. And this is where you're going to understand. When you understand food and what food does, you will see how food should be a medicine. Exactly, Laffy. It is estrogen. Now, we also pay attention to this now. Estrogen drops naturally during the menstruation period. Now, how much of us remember last week and the week before when we were talking about estrogen dominance that we mentioned some foods that are naturally high in phytoestrogen, and if you have a condition that feeds upon excess estrogen, you should reduce those foods until that condition is reversed. Now, this is where you're going to actually use those foods to help you to regain the balance. So in that case last week, like fibroids, for example, fibroids is a case where too much estrogen aggravates the problem. So in this case, we don't want to be adding things like flaxseed. We don't want to be adding things like soybeans and these things because why? They are naturally high in estrogen. Now, remember, the foods themselves are not bad. But if you are having a situation where there is too much fire in the kitchen, you don't want to come in with more fuel. Whether the fuel is good fuel, organic fuel, unleaded fuel, you don't want to add fuel because the situation is already out of control. But it's the same thing in fibroids. So we're not saying that the foods themselves are bad. We are just saying for this specific condition, let us control the situation first before we bring in the good things. Now, in this case, because estrogen is going down, this is where we do the reverse. When our body's natural estrogen factories are a little bit low. And so we need to turn the gear up because we can't reboot the ovaries. You know what I mean? We can't add more eggs there, so to speak. So now we're going to go to the outside world using foods that are high in phytoestrogen, and then we're going to add them back in so they can naturally bring back up. Now, if I'm not mistaken, I think when the ovaries shut down, the adrenals take over in some of the production of the estrogen. So now you have to also be careful of having adrenal fatigue. So the next thing you want to do during this period is make sure that you eat foods that will support your adrenals. And this is where our adaptogens come in. This is where our adaptogens come in. And these are the herbs that will help our body, deal at a high level of stress, right? So some other foods that we look at is the iodine-rich foods because, of course, thyroid plays a part in that signaling. So kelp, dulse, seaweed, pineapple. And you'll use things like broccoli, kale, cabbage, and of course our whole grains, nuts, seeds, olive oil, coconut oil. Now, what you guys are realizing in that every single case we do, foods always play a major role in the process. And so it begs for us to start reconsider what we are putting into our bodies. Your food that you eat is either healing you or hurting you. There is no middle ground. And you will also realize that we always put the herbs, the supplements at the end. Why? Because if we don't fix this food thing for us, the herb and the supplements will not really have much effect that they will have. You will have to just be using them over and over and over, and you'll just be getting a temporary relief. Right? So just thought I would put that in there for you. Now we can get into some of the vitamins and so that we can look at. And this one will be vitamin E. Now, this is for persons going through the menopausal period. Vitamin E, this helps specifically with the hot flashes and vaginal dryness. Vitamin C will help with the leg cramps and skin tone. Calcium and magnesium, Dr. Dian touched on that. That is for the bones and mental calm. Iron will help to support the energy, oxygen transport. And then we have silica, which supports the skin, hair, and nails. Now, there are some foods, of course, there are some foods you got to avoid during this period. Animal products, of course, it's Coach Jason had to go there. You had to go there. But listen, I only have to give you the information as I know it was. This is what I'm saying today. And of course, I have to give you the information from the sources that I teach from. And so we also saw last week that animal products are naturally high in certain chemicals that would affect the body's normal process. Now, there was a time, I would say, there was a time, that time is gone, when animal foods were a lot safer to eat than they are today. Now, you only need to just go and do your research. You don't need to take my word for it. You just need to go and do your research on the slaughterhouses, on the milk and cheese industry, on the big pharma. Now, of course, we have gone to a new level where the foods are now being grown. Should I say grown or should I say created in a lab? Right? So we have lab grown meats. So no longer do we need to kill a cow to get beef. We could do these things in lab. And if we have gotten this part where we can now use lab to grow food, it really tells us that you really may want to reconsider what you eat, right? So the purpose for these fats is that they're high in fat, they promote hormonal imbalance, which just aggravates the problem because your hormones are already out of balance. Caffeine. Caffeine will cause more bone loss and hormonal disruption. Now, let me explain the caffeine link for you. Caffeine and sugar have a similar link. And this is how it works. So when sugar, caffeine as well, hits the body, they create inside an acidic response. Acidic response. Now, if something is acidic, what do you add to it? Alkaline. Now, where does the alkaline in your body come from? Typically calcium. Where is calcium stored in your body? In your bones. So when there's a high acidic environment in your body will draw from the bones calcium to balance that acid and bring it down to a more workable pH, so to speak, more of a neutral pH. But as it draws from the calcium reserves in the bone, it also means that the calcium reserves in the bone goes down, which is why when constant use of this can lead to things like, especially in the 50, 60 years, things like osteoporosis, weakening bones. And of course, when you fall, fracture these bones, the recovery and healing process could sometimes be a permanent damage, right? So that's the link there. Now, the hormone, of course, caffeine is a stimulant. It will cause the racing of adrenaline and also cortisol, which we know your body is either building or breaking down. Now, there are two categories. Cortisol is in the breaking down category, and the sex hormones, which is estrogen, progesterone, these are in the building category. Your body don't do both at the same time. So if one is running, the other one goes down, which you will see now. Once the caffeine is introduced every morning, every single day, adrenals are high, cortisol is being pumped, and so these hormones can be produced as efficiently because the body is now going to prioritize these ones, right? Alcohol, well, ovarian toxicity. We could just leave it at that. Again, we talk about refined sugars, hot spices, and these things help with the hot flashes, right? Let me just check my message here. Dr. D, let me know when you're in, right? So we looked at that there. Now, let's look at some other things that you could add during this period. This is something I would always recommend, and it helps with your liver function, and it is the hydration and digestion. So I always recommend to use about what we say 16 to 32 ounce warm water every morning. I just keep it simple. A cup of warm water with a tablespoon of lemon juice, you add it in there, you drink that every morning. And this will also help with the liver doing its function and make sure as well that you are remaining hydrated. Now, this is something that you want to pay attention to. Exercise plays a more crucial part during this period of your life. When we talk about the weakening bones, exercise actually helps to strengthen your bones. And what it also does is helps to build muscle. Now, a lot of ladies seem to shy away from muscle, but if you have ever heard me mention this before, muscle is life insurance, right? So the stronger you are, or the more muscle you pack on, one, your metabolism is going to be higher. As long as your metabolism is higher, your dispensation to gaining fat goes down. So you tend to be leaner. Additionally, they did a test and they were looking at the link between strength and longevity. And they were looking at it between healthy individuals and individuals who were not so healthy. But the only factor that was consistent between all of them was the strength test. In this case, the strength test. Now, of course, for you to become strong, you need to have more muscle. So they did this strength test, and what they found is that individuals who are stronger tend to live longer. Even if, when they did the unhealthy analysis, even if these individuals were smokers. Now, I'm not saying to go out and smoke, but I'm just showing you how critical of a factor strength, muscle, plays in your longevity. That is why we always say muscle is life insurance, right? Now, they also looked at individuals who were still healthy, but not as strong, didn't have as much muscle, and what they noticed is the reduce in mortality. So, muscle plays a very crucial role, especially for us when we pass that 50, 60 age. So if you're not lifting weights now, if you're not doing resistance training, this is my encouragement to you to start implementing that. Naturally, your body is going to start losing muscle. So strength training at a basic prevents that muscle loss. And what the research also showed is that this is just for preventing muscle loss, not for building new muscle loss. So to stop the process, as little as one strength training session every 2 weeks was enough to stop muscle loss, right? But you don't want to just stop it, you want to build it, right? So you'll learn a little bit more than that. Okay? Lovely. Now, of course, we're going to talk about the sleep, going to bed before 10 p.m. And if the pause is going to say, well, if I can't sleep, why am I going to bed before 10 p.m.? Now, I'm going to give you some things that addresses most of the major problems with menopause. Now, let me just go back up here briefly. And let me just make a quick check here. I'm going to go back up to the symptoms, right? Right. I'm going to go back up to the symptoms. So, during this period, because your hormones are racing, things are out of balance, some of the things that can help you during these periods would be herbs that tend to calm your body. So things like hopseed, passion flower, these will tend to calm your body down. Ashwagandha, specifically if you can get the one with the KSM 66, this will also help with the calming period during this time. Now, of course, we talk about the aching backs, back pain, and osteoporosis. Trust me, guys, the best thing for this is exercise. Strength training exercise specifically. So it is good if you're walking every day, that's perfect, that helps your cardiovascular, does nothing for your strength. But if you add some strength training into it, then you would also help with the back pains, the osteoporosis, of course, big one, and the aches and pains. Now, of course, you would work around your injuries until you get back. What I have found is that if you have an injury, let's say you have a knee pain, or if you always have noisy back, or whatever the case is, the more you baby it, the worse it becomes. That is what I have seen in most of my clients. So if you have a knee pain, like, you know what, I have a knee pain, I'm going to avoid using my knee. That condition is going to become worse. Vice versa. If you decide to do small movements that you begin to activate the knee, then the knee is going to heal. Why? Because when you activate the knee, now you tell the body, hey, we have a demand for this knee, the body is going to increase blood flow to the knee. When blood flow comes, healing elements come, which will help to heal the condition, especially if it's not a severe condition in that knee, and it will help to reverse the pain. Try it out for yourself. If you have any pain, just baby pain for a couple of days. You will see the pain get worse. Start moving around, the pain tends to go away. Right? Irregular bleeding. Now, there are a couple herbs we could use here, but again, we also have to remember that this is also part of it, right? Now, in terms of dryness, one herb that helps with boosting bodily fluids wherever in your body is sea moss gel. Very powerful in doing that for you. And there's the next one, slippery elm. slippery elm. So these two herbs, if you have access to them, I know most of us listening here have access to the Simos gel. That really helps with increasing bodily fluid. All right. And that will definitely assist you in that area. So hope you're making notes and taking down some of these herbs because I don't think I have all of them written down here. Now, the next thing I'm going to be touching on is the similar thing that we did last week for the fibroids. Now, remember the condition of menopause. It's not a condition. The transition of menopause, again, deals with hormones. So we'll always use things that will help to balance out the hormones. Now, remember, the estrogen is going to go down. That's a natural process. But what you want to avoid is the spikes, because the spike is what's going to give you the mood swings, the hot flashes, and all of the other symptoms that is associated with it. So, of course, if you notice right at the top, milk thistle. Put in the chat if you remember what the milk thistle is good for. In the chat, if you remember exactly what milk thistle is good for. Let me see if anybody remember. Okay, I see Dr. Dian there, so I'm almost going to finish now and hand this over to Dr. Dian. So milk thistle is for the liver. Dandelion does the same thing. Dandelion also helps with the blood. So, of course, week one, these are the teas you're going to be using, and you're going to rotate them. Red clover, that is specifically for the menopause. Burdock root, that helps with the blood cleaning. Wild yam, of course, that helps with estrogen. And sage leaf, and then Don Quai. I know we have a question mark on that one, but black cohosh for sure, that also helps with the hormonal balance. And once you begin to add these things in, it's really going to improve. Now I'm going to add something else here specifically for sleep. Two things you could use. Well, let me tell you a couple of things you could use. Ashwagandha works for some people. For others, soursop leaves works. For others, soursop bitters works. I don't really recommend, and Dr. DNA could jump on this one, I don't really recommend melatonin because I don't like to throw off people's natural rhythm, right? I prefer to use herbs that support the release of the sleep hormones as opposed to pump the sleep hormones themselves, right? So I don't really recommend melatonin for persons. All right, so these would normally help with the sleep. And next big one, of course, I'm going to come back to it, is exercise. If you can't sleep, this is just for anybody, not going through menopause only. If you can't sleep, try and exercise like 6 o'clock, 5 o'clock. And I guarantee you, the talent you get from that, you can probably sleep a lot better than had you not exercised. So it can be a simple thing as walking. I find strength training tend to tire you out more. So that would probably want to recommend if you have the time for it. And it could be as little as 10 to 15 minutes. That would help to improve your sleep. And of course, let's look at this one because remember, trust in divine power is one of the laws of health. And practice forgiveness. Hey, listen, you'll be surprised to know how much persons endure mental torture because of unforgiveness. Now, this is something I'm going to add here. And before I add, let me pause and sip on some blue waters. Forgiveness does nothing for the other person. What do I mean? We are familiar with the Bible, most of us. When we transgress the law, it is called sin. There is a book in heaven called the Book of Remembrance. When you confess your sin, the Bible says he's faithful and just to forgive your sins and to cleanse from all unrighteousness. So who has the power to cleanse or forgive your sin? God. Perfect. So if that is the case, even if Antival, I'm using Antival because I know Antival personally, if Antival does me something and she does not go to God and ask forgiveness, but I forgive her, does that mean Auntie Val name is removed from the book of remembrance? Does that mean that God has forgiven Auntie Val? Obviously not. All the forgiveness does for me, I'm the only one who benefits from the forgiveness, mainly because one, when I see Auntie Val, I'm not going to hold any animosity. I'm not going to feel no kind of way. I'm not going to get this rage of emotion coming in. Forgiveness is like releasing the burden for you. So when you forgive somebody, it doesn't mean that you wipe their name off the book of remembrance. It doesn't mean that you blot out their sin. You can't do that. Forgiveness does more for you. It just means that you no longer have to walk with that burden on your back for the rest of your life. And might I add, there is a strong link between certain cancers and the spirit of unforgiveness. So there is also the health benefit. If you want to call it an anti-carcinogen, so to speak, forgiveness does that for you. There is also the anxiety. There is the mental health. So we can go on with this list. There is the hormonal balance that is going to happen. Because when you're stressed, remember we says that when you're stressed, and if you have a condition, somebody did something, you just playing that tape over and over and over again, cortisol goes up. When cortisol goes up, that is the breakdown hormone, which means the building hormones, which are the sex hormones, goes down. So you are throwing your hormonal balance off by practicing unforgiveness. So if you notice, all of these benefits have nothing to do with antivalent. All of these benefits are mine. This is just me practicing forgiveness. Now, I'm not saying forgiveness is easy, and there are certain conditions that persons would have gone through. The ones that come to my mind right off the bat, which I know is have to be tough, is going to be like a young child getting assaulted by a family member from a young age. That is a tough one. Of course, only Lord could help with that person, right? That's a tough one right off the bat. But once they get past that, once they get the help, once the Holy Spirit works in their heart, they're going to gain all the benefit, right? So, and next thing you want to do, ladies, going through this period, and I think Dr. Dio touched on this, is start to build the connections. I think I like to use antival. Now, antival is over 70. Antival, correct me if I'm wrong, is 75 or 70? Jump on and correct me if I'm wrong. Last
74,
week,
74,
74. 74. And listen, there's not another young girl in Point 14 like Antival. Antival in everything. We had a sports day today at my sons and daughters' primary school at the Adventist school in Port Road. And Antival, I didn't even realize Antival was such an ST member. When they trained with the march past, they had to do the salute, the general salute, the right tone to Antival and Auntie Vic, Dr. Vic, right? These two ladies are past 70 and they in every single thing. Last week, Sunday, it was Antival. She ran the 5K up in Port of Spain. Was it last week, Sunday, Antival? And she showed me the medal. And that is one of the many
yes,
5Ks
yes.
she ran, right? In church, she involved in the children's section. When she not in the children's section, she had every morning at 5:30, she had fit my workout working on. So she has surrounded herself with the band of sisters, like to call her one of the golden girls down here in Point 14. But you could see it reflected in her life. And I'm just using her as an example. And next part that I'm seeing this too is a lot in the Fitma community. We have like Ronell, we have Merle, and they have formed their own little community in there. And so when you attach yourself to a community, especially this period, the support, the emotional support and help from the other ladies, especially other ladies going through the same period like you, it will help to foster a smoother transition. And for even the younger ladies who are coming along, when they hear your stories, I always remember Janelle and Ronell, always, they're exchanging stories. So Ronell is kind of guiding Janelle as the path to come. And so they are gaining from each other's expertise. And no man is an island or woman. And the more connections, healthy connections you have, it will help you to get through this period. So I think I'm rattling enough. Dr. Diane, it's your world, it's your time to shine. I'm going to hand it over to you. I know I saw you there a while ago. Right. So Dr. Diane, I'll hand you the screen sharing as well. Let me do it right now. Please, guys, put your hands together virtually and welcome our esteemed doctor who always make time for us here on the Evesham Sda Health. Please give her a round of applause. And I'm right, thank you. There are the round of applause coming in, Dr. Dian, all you.
Right. So good night, everyone. So before I just chose some random slides to present on, but I just wanted to answer your question about that you just mentioned about the melatonin. So while I agree generally that I don't particularly use melatonin, maybe except for like when you're traveling and there's jet lag and you really want to reset. I do actually recommend melatonin for menopausal women. And it's actually because the ability and the melatonin production actually falls. So you'd find that postmenopausal women actually see a lot more benefit to melatonin than, let's say, somebody in their 20s who's just using it because they have bad sleep hygiene. You'll find women in menopause, especially in that struggle period, will see a lot of benefit with melatonin. And another reason why they see benefit is, remember in the first lecture, we talked a lot about how estrogen has a big effect on the gut. Melatonin also has a huge effect on the gut. So again, when we're talking menopause, we're talking about a gut that's also in imbalance. So we have this 2-for-1 special with melatonin when we use it in postmenopause, because you get that benefit of having the sleep. Then you also get that gut benefit. And you'd find that I could use 10, 20 milligrams of melatonin as maybe just a support system, not something that I recommend that they use long term. But while they're trying to build good habits, when things are in complete disarray, when they're in a full imbalance, melatonin can be really helpful for that particular woman. So I do recommend melatonin for the right woman. And like I said, particularly in that. Let
Quick
me
question
just
for you.
go ahead.
How much milligrams you recommend for a person,
I
a
would
woman in
start
this stage?
I would start with 10, but I could go up to as high as 20.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, so I
Thank you
would
very much.
start with 10
Because two
most
is
of
the
the
highest
time and
I've
go up
seen.
to 20.
Okay. And any specific time is like a few hours before bed, you would recommend
Correct. So
the
I
dosage?
would remember the role of melatonin is to prepare the body for sleep. So it naturally
Mhm.
rises and it's going to peak at that time when you want to sleep and then
Mhm.
sort of plateau out. So most of the time I'll recommend taking it around 8 o'clock. Well, let's say about 7 to 8, because I think bedtime
Mhm.
should be around 10. So you want to take it about 2 hours before your actual bedtime. And you want to remember it's not a sleep pill. So
Mhm.
it's not going to suddenly just, knock you out and make you sleep. It's just preparing the body for sleep. So that's something we have to remember with melatonin. It's not going to knock you out. So you can't be taking melatonin and then you're watching TV and you're watching all kind of action movies and you're in the screen. Melatonin is really you're lying down in your bed, you're listening to some hymns, a little quiet time and easier way preparing into sleep, right? So it's not a sleep pill, it's a support for your natural production, which declines as you get older. Yeah, good. Hold on, I'm still trying to open my PowerPoint. I don't know why it's giving trouble now, but that's okay. So I want to just touch on two maybe little things on the uh right, good. Okay, so can you let me share the screen? Hold on. Share screen. Uh, right, good. So I think you've done a good job. So you've gone through a lot of things about menopause, and a lot of people will have a good foundation about menopause. So all I want to do is just highlight a few things that I think for me are important when I talk about menopause to anybody. And I think menopause, I think I mentioned that last time, we need to get into the habit of, as women, discussing these issues. It's not a secret. Gone are the days where we have to wrap up sanitary napkins and, you know, black paper bags when we buy it in the supermarket, and we have to hide, and these things are whispers, in the dark. We're past that stage. We need to be able as women to have conversations about these very real issues, because a lot of the misconceptions happen because it's like this taboo subject that's just whispered about, and people get information from this one and that one and that one, and it doesn't make sense to a lot of people and they end up confused. If you want to ask or try to predict what your menopause is going to be like, ask your mother and ask your aunt on the maternal side. Okay? So, classically, and again, this is a generalization, I admit, but your pattern is going to be most affected by your maternal side. Okay? So, if your mother tended to have early difficult menopause, you would probably have the same way. And the same thing goes for pregnancy. So you'd find that if you look at your aunts and your mother, or if you have an older sibling, that's the kind of pattern of menopause. And I've seen that because I look at my mother and I look at my older sister and I see the identical pattern. I make the joke that menopause is a personality because I see my sister morphing into my mother and I'm like, oh my goodness, what? Like flashbacks, of when I was a child and my mother would see certain things and I look at my sister and I'm like, how could you? How could you? So I like to joke that menopause is a personality. And when we look at, your relatives, your genetics, that becomes important because it's genetics that's going to determine your metabolism. It's genetics that determine your phenotype, um, because that's how it's going to manifest. Now, of course, there are going to be things that will skew it. So I'll give you an example. So like my sister has two children. I don't have any children, and we're like 2 years apart. So I'm more than likely going to go into menopause before or around the same time that she does. Why? Because nulliparity and not having children means that menopause is going to happen a little bit earlier. Remember, when you get pregnant and you have a child, there's going to be at least a year where you're not really using eggs and releasing eggs. And so you'd find that women who have lots of children, let's say you have 5, 6, 7, 8 children, which is what used to happen, 10, 20 years ago, you'd find those women didn't go through menopause till much later in life. And now I'm seeing in my practice women going into menopause in their 30s and in their 40s. And the reason is a lot of women are stressed. We have lots of imbalance. And a lot of women are choosing not to have children until later in life. And that choice pushes the sort of gap between that childbearing and menopause. It narrows that transition period a little bit. So you find that women who don't have children till much later will tend to have menopause happening much, much earlier in life. So nulliparity is not having children. And that is one of the things that's going to make you have menopause a little bit earlier. So while my sister and I may have similar genetics, and let's say we think menopause will happen around, let's say age 50, and I'm just using a random number. Let's say my mother had menopause at age 50. So we're thinking about age 50 that's going to happen. Because my mother had 5 children, my sister had 2. My sister might go into menopause just a bit earlier than my mother. So she may experience menopause maybe coming down to the late 40s, like maybe a 47, 48 kind of thing. But because I don't have any children, I might find menopause happens for me maybe when I'm 45, 46, which is right around the corner for me. So this is what we have to think about when we're thinking about, and so that transition and how menopause will happen. You kind of get a generalization looking at your family, but then you look at all the other little factors that's going to skew the dynamics a little bit and give you an idea of when menopause is going to happen, right? So I love to preach the beauty of estrogen because I think you can't understand menopause if you're not thinking about what does estrogen do. And we have to remember that estrogen has so many other benefits than, because we like to paint estrogen as this negative thing because we're treating an imbalance, right? But remember, estrogen has vital functions in the body. And I love, love, love to emphasize two main things. You see that brain and gut support that estrogen gives us? A lot of women are blaming all sorts of things, on. So it's my diet. I'm not smart enough, I can't come up with the ideas, I'm slow. And really, it's just the estrogen imbalance that's not helping them optimize their brain, optimize their gut health. And therefore, they keep doing the wrong thing. When if they were just focused on balancing the hormones, the ideas are snapping, the creativity is coming out, the brain fog clears, the memory improves. This pregnancy brain, the menopausal brain, where do you think it comes from? It comes from the hormonal imbalance that comes predominantly from the estrogen that goes really, really high and drops really low during both pregnancy and menopause. The other one I love to emphasize is also the heart health because we see it all the time. Men tend to have these sudden heart attacks, sudden events. You'll hear they're on the football field, they're on the cricket grounds, they drop down, they have a massive heart attack, a massive stroke. You don't hear that about women. Why? We don't hear it because women and estrogen protects our heart and our blood vessels. Again, why? Because it's supporting pregnancy. And that ability to change and adapt the way our blood flows and where it's stored is what gives us that extra benefit. So I can have women walking around with a blood count of 6 and 7 and functioning And you'll have a man with the same blood count. Listen, and he can't do anything. He's in a bed, he can't move a muscle, he's sick, he's dying. And we're like, please, that's every other month for us, right? And part of that is that estrogen support that gives us. And at the bottom of my slide there, you'd see where I've highlighted some symptoms that you would notice when the estrogen starts to drop. So the hot flashes, the night sweats, the sleep disruption, that's what I was mentioning with the melatonin there. It does support you regularizing your sleep. Why is that important? Because sleep is critical. Okay, and I'm going to touch on that just a little bit later. Mood changes. No, your menopausal wife is not just snappy and irritable. It's funny because we see that a lot of women initiate divorce and separation when they go into menopause, and it's this kind of running joke, right? My wife went through menopause and she changed and she's not the same person and she just pick up and she go on and this and that and that is a midlife crisis. No, that was menopause because she reached critical breaking point and she did not have the support estrogen would give us to add that resilience to be able to cope, to adapt, and to have the tolerance because she's fighting for a young child, she's fighting for family. So when she doesn't have that support anymore, she just can't take it and she runs away. Okay, it's fight or flight. There's a reason that is across the board. And so something we always have to remember. And sometimes as women, just like you said, we have to have that support network, right? I remember one of my patients and she was on birth control and the dose was too high. I realized that. But she was telling me she called her boyfriend 20 times. And by call number 10, she knew she was doing nonsense, but she couldn't stop herself. And she sits in my office and she's crying. And I'm like, this is not you. You know it's not you, right? But yet you can't help yourself. Most of us, by the third call, you stop. She knew she should have stopped by then, but she kept going. And by call number, and I saw it, she showed me. By call number 20, she's like, yeah, okay, now I've done enough. But why did it take her so long? That's hormonal imbalance. And again, it goes back to what I was saying last time I was on. And I said sometimes it's difficult to have a male gynecologist because when you try to describe what it feels like to be controlled by a hormone, men don't get it. They literally don't get it because it's a brain heart can disconnects. Like there's no logic in that. Is I feel I need to share. I feel I need to do this. I need a response. I need a response. I need a response. And at what point is it too much? I remember as a child sometimes, and I'm sure all of us Caribbean people had this experience, where as children, your mother trip off on one sibling, and everybody, had to wrap up and on the dung. You can't slam a door. You can't talk too loud because you would be next in the firing line. We've all had that experience, I am sure. So it's that menopause where it's a domino effect. And, it starts with one, but then each problem that comes afterward really just creates this huge mountain out of a molehill. And you can't make sense of it, right? So women lash out at that. And those changes are estrogen related. It's not you going mad. And we as women need that support. So sometimes we need a woman to hold our hand and say, hey, I know this is not you. You need some support. How can I help you? Sometimes as women, we just need to share. Sometimes we just need somebody to say, yeah, your husband real nasty, yeah? Yeah. He was wrong to do that. Why you didn't bring in some flour? Why you didn't, we just need to vent it. It's not that, you want
Think we lost Doctor for a while. She'll jump back in. No worry. She was on a hot topic there.
Yeah, I
Some
got
business
cut off
said,
there. But that's okay.
okay, right.
The energy of my topic was too high for the computer. But what I'm saying is a fact, right? We as women, sometimes we just need to vent, right? And we need women to bring us back to reality. And after we vent and we cry and we say what we had to say and we call them all kind of names and say what and we let it out, we're back to baseline again and we can say, good. now I could go back and face him, and I'm good now. I just needed to release that, right? And so this is where that support comes in. Whereas women, we really have to support each other in understanding that sometimes this is what it is. It doesn't mean there's no love involved. It just means we're at a point where the buildup is creating a problem. We need to release it and reset our nervous system, right? Let me just reshare. Hold on. My screen. Okay, good. The other big thing, brain fog, joint pains. Now, this is a big one. I think it's every single menopausal woman comes and complains about joint pains. And I keep saying, and they keep blaming it.
Don't worry, Dr. Dion, we have patience. Unmute yourself.
Is it on my end or
I'm really not sure. I really can't tell you.
all right, okay.
Are we
Well, let's
seeing
just
screen come?
we'll just keep going.
We're seeing a screen coming up. We're seeing it now.
Okay, good. Right. So the other thing I want to touch on is perimenopause. So we talked about what menopause is, and we had this whole list of symptoms that includes menopause. But I just want to touch a bit on perimenopause. Now, remember what I said earlier, where we're seeing women presenting at menopause much earlier in life. So I have women who, by definition, are in menopause in their 30s. And how do we know for sure? One, we could do hormonal testing, so we can literally do estrogen levels and see what they are. We could also do an ultrasound and we could actually look at the size of the ovaries because you'll see atrophying of the ovaries. And that's another sign that menopause has taken place, right? So we can see women who have confirmed menopause in their 30s, and that's been a trending thing, 30s and 40s. So what we need to talk about is perimenopause, because to me, perimenopause is in most cases just as bad as menopause, because you physically feel like, why should I have to deal with this? I'm not in menopause. I I'm still in that prime of life where I'm busy, children, career, this, that, the other. Because I mean, when we're talking menopause, we're looking at mostly women who are close to retirement. So this perimenopause happens in a phase of life where you have so many other responsibilities that it's really, really difficult to cope with it. So right up there with that is we need to think about perimenopause and supporting menopause. Because if we support menopause in perimenopause, the whole transition into menopause and by extension menopause becomes a lot better. It's the same symptoms, but what's the difference with the symptoms? It probably is intermittent. So whereas somebody who's in full menopause may have the hot flashes and stuff every night, a woman who's in perimenopause might find it happens maybe 2, 3, 4 times a year. And she thinks, oh, what is that weird thing that's happening to me? And, what's going on? She may have a big project and suddenly she finds she's struggling to complete her project. And that's not something that typically happens. And she'd be like, yeah, I just didn't do my best. I didn't do my best. I didn't do my best. But that could have been the perimenopause, the brain fog that's acting up. Sleep issues. A lot of women have sleep issues. If I ask, the group of people we have now, how many women have sleep issues, I'm sure it's going to be about 80%, right? And again, it's because most of the crowd that we're speaking to, if they're not in menopause, they're in perimenopause. Because for me, I'm talking anybody 35 and older is probably in that perimenopause group. And then anybody above that 45 and up is in the menopause group. So pretty much everybody here, right, myself included, is in this group of having to deal with menopause and having to think about menopause as a real thing, that we can't wait until that factor treats. We have to begin preparing our bodies and supporting the systems as that happens. And then, of course, the mood changes. You're not going to see, you can't, I always say, you can't tell a mad person they're mad. You can't, right? Because in their head, they're not mad. So there's no logic to tell somebody that who's mad that they're mad. Okay? So you can't say that you're having mood changes necessarily. Who's going to give you that feedback? It's going to be the people around you. So when people around you start making the comments, I be even so girl, why you want to come online with a why you this and why you that? Pay attention. And I mean, we like to sometimes take comments always in a negative light, but sometimes feedback is good, and we have to just take feedback as just feedback and not personal. You know what I mean? And you go to the grocery and somebody say, make a comment at you about why your face swell up. So, men is being in the Caribbean, they always have something to say, right? I'm calling all the men out. We probably don't have many men in the audience, but men know what they're talking about. Or, oh God, darling, smile now. Come on. You know what I'm talking about. And, you catch yourself and you have to be like, what my face was really looking like, for real. Was I, deep in my cons? So sometimes the feedback that you get is, should really be, stick a pin in it and say to yourself, is something really going on with me internally? Am I so overwhelmed? Am I irritable? Am I anxiety? What is the feedback I'm getting externally about myself? Am I changing? And this could be a sign, like I said, of perimenopause, where you find yourself morphing into this different person. Your friends change, family noticing it, you noticing it, because oftentimes they will see it before you even realize it to yourself, because you're you every single day. And you're not going to see that today you're more irritable than yesterday, but somebody else will pick it up before you do, right? You're always so nice to me. What happened to you today? Simple things like, why are you looking so tired every day? Why are you looking so stressed? And sometimes, like I said, sometimes we just need to take feedback as feedback and not take it personally. And if we get that kind of feedback, just have a moment and say, what's happening with me? Do I need help? Do I need support? What's happening with me? And so perimenopause is another big one that I think we need to, hold on, I lost my mouse, look at. Irregular periods. This is another big one. We think irregular periods is just your cycle being off. So you miss a month or, but remember we have a curve. So a period can last anywhere from 21 days all the way to 32 days, and we'll still count it as normal. But if I'm usually having a 25-day period and I have a 32-day period, that's irregular, right? Because that's not your norm. So even though it still falls within the normal, it's not your norm. So I would count that as something irregular. So you have to ask yourself what's happening there, and then, so for instance, I would have cycles. My typical cycle is like 26 days, but I will have times where I go to 31 days, and I can tell you when it's going to happen, because it's usually the months that you're more stressed out. It's usually the months that something else is going on. So it's not a big change. So the women in the group will tell me, you've had the experience where your period comes and it just flows. It starts day one. And then you have periods where you wipe, you see blood, and you think, all right, come in. You put on, your little sanitary pad, and you think, okay. And then you reach home, nothing. And you think, wasting money upon a whole thing and nothing at flow. And then the day two, you wipe and you see something else. And you're feeling the symptoms, it's going to come, but nothing, nothing, nothing. And then when it finally comes, you feel this relief. It's like, oh, yes, finally it come. It starts to flow, And so you have this transition in between that, where instead of the period flowing, there's a struggle for it to come. And if you remember the graph we did when we talked about that whole estrogen, progesterone graph, remember that what that progesterone does and what that estrogen does, and remember that cycle is so interwoven. One depends on the other. So when you have a lot more stress, when you have a lot of things going on, you're also shifting that period cycle. So you'll see even smaller irregularities before you get the big irregularities. So I tell women, don't panic about it, but pay attention. So if I know I've had a really stressful month and I have that kind of cycle, I know, okay, right, that's why I had that cycle. I expected that. But if you find that everything has been fine and you're seeing all these weird things, again, take a moment, pause. What was really happening this month that might have triggered this to happen, right? Because irregular periods are not just you miss a whole month or you're bleeding for 2 or 3 weeks. Pay attention to all the intricacies that happen as well. You're accustomed having 5 days and now you're down to 3 days, or you're accustomed having 3 days and then you went to 7 days. Those are also irregularities, and you have to ask yourself what is happening there. Weight changes, of course, especially around the midsection, and I want to touch on that a little bit. And we talk about the joint aches and the low energy. Why is the low energy? Estrogen, because estrogen gives us vitality. The same way testosterone makes men feel like, yeah, I'm the most powerful being on planet Earth, estrogen gives us our vitality as women. So when it's out of balance, too high or too low, and this is a mistake, people think, okay, if I have more estrogen, I should feel better. No, once it's out of cycle, once the balance isn't right, you're going to have low energy because it's not going to be giving you the right signals. Okay. So perimenopause, menopause, postmenopause, okay? Just telling you it's a transition. There's no hard and fast rules. So I don't even like to give people set, oh, so when actually is the menopause? No, there's no definite points of menopause, okay? We use the fact of the cessation of your period as a tangible point. But long before that stops, the changes have been happening years before that. Your estrogen doesn't go just from normal to zero to stop a period from happening. It's a transition. So we use that as an endpoint and we say menopause, that's menopause. But that doesn't mean that's when menopause starts. Menopause started long before in the perimenopause phase, okay? Long before. And then you go into menopause and we say, okay, when you've had 12 months without a period, then we could technically say medically you've gone into menopause. But I've had women who had continued to have periods because of estrogen dominance, let's say, because of gut issues, and their ovaries had already atrophied. So if atrophy of the ovaries is also a sign of menopause, but you're still bleeding, are you in menopause or are you not in menopause? You understand? So this is why I keep saying you can't say, okay, right, this is the only marker of menopause. Because if you have atrophy, but like I said, for whatever reason, they're still bleeding, maybe you have endometrial issues, blah, 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 you will continue to bleed even though you're in menopause. So again, the transition, you have to look at all the things that will play a role in the actual menopause, not just the cessation of the cycle, okay? Symptoms improve long term. So most women, after they get through menopause and things balance out, they feel better. Things start to look up because their body now adapts to the changes that happens. But remember these key things that I've highlighted here, right? Because the estrogen is still low, you have to pay attention to the bone loss. Okay, that's a big issue. Most of the time when I see hip fractures, because I do a lot of geriatric work, it's women. So roll off a bed, slip and fall, and fracture. We don't see it as commonly in men. And reason being the estrogen and the low bone density, because testosterone is going to help men maintain that bone density. But for women, we don't have that. So once that bone density goes, fractures happen like that for very, very simple things. Heart disease now increases. So we now match men in terms of the incidence of heart attacks and strokes because now that becomes an issue. And then muscle preservation, that's a big problem, men to women. And if you look at the geriatric population, what you will find is you find more fat, and I'm using fat in inverted commas because I'm not talking necessarily about BMI. I'm talking more about the ratio of muscle to fat. You'll find that ratio of fat to muscle is going to be a lot higher in women, and women don't have that ability to hold on to the muscle. So women are a lot flabbier, let's put it that way, when they get to a certain age, whereas you find the older men just get skinny, they just shrivel up, but you can still see muscle there, they're not flabby. And the reason is because estrogen is going to skew that ratio quite a bit. So the woman who by definition, we'll always have that predisposition to 20% body fat or higher because of estrogen, and we don't have that capability to hold on to muscle. You'll always find as we get older, your key thing has to be preserving the muscle to ensure that you have better bone density, better mobility, and a decrease in mortality generally if you have more muscle mass. So that is absolutely key. And that work does not start in postmenopause. Where does it start? It starts in perimenopause. Okay, that building of the bone density and the muscle mass has to start in perimenopause. You can't wait until then, because now you've lost your support to try and get you to the bone density and the muscle mass you want. So you don't wait until then to do it. You start from perimenopause, right? Just a couple of things. And again, same thing that I've been saying here with the lifestyle, exercise, protein, managing sleep, managing stress, your vitamin D, calcium, omega. Why? Again, that's a bone density. That's a hormonal issue. Very, very important. Hormonal replacement therapy. For some women, HRT is actually important. And it's more important for women that we have initiated early menopause for some other reason. So again, let's say somebody had a pregnancy and we had to do a hysterectomy and she was 35, but let's say she had uterine rupture. Okay, so we had to remove it. She's going to go into menopause, right? So at that point, her risk of having complications of low estrogen is going to be far higher. So she will probably need HRT. Now, that's a very different scenario to somebody who is in menopause naturally at age 50 and just decides they want HRT. That's two very different scenarios, okay? Now, we can have a woman who's in her 40s, let's say, and let's say maybe she wants to support fertility because she's older and she wants to have a baby. That's somebody we may consider using HRT, hormone replacement. Again, why? Because we're trying to increase fertility for a specific outcome, okay? Then we also would have maybe a scenario where a woman is going through menopause at, let's say, age 45, but her symptoms are so dramatic. Let's say her bone density is so low, she can't do anything. She's starting to have thyroid problems. And I'll mention that a little bit. So she might be someone that I would want to do HRT because the symptoms she's having require us to add that support. Okay. So HRT for most people is optional, but for some categories, it's really, really highly recommended. Non-hormonal treatments are also part. So we have lots of advancements now where we can work to support your body's natural estrogen production, natural progesterone production. It doesn't always mean you need to take the pills. Now we have patches, we have all sorts of things that you could use, and that works well. One of the things I want to mention here with why we also support HRT is we have a hormonal axis. And on the top is the pituitary and your thyroid. Okay? The thyroid is one of the main organs that's going to influence what's happening with the ovaries. So it's not coincidence that the highest group of thyroid dysfunction is perimenopause and menopausal women. Women over the age of 40 is the highest group of people with thyroid disease. Why? Because again, estrogen gives us vitality. Estrogen is what's going to make us female. Estrogen is driving metabolism, it's driving healing, it's driving all these processes. So when the estrogen starts to drop, the thyroid is going to kick in and say, hey, you're not making enough estrogen. Make some more. We need more to support this, to support that, to support heart circulation. So the thyroid starts to make more hormones to then stimulate the ovaries, but the ovaries are dead. It's not making anything. So what's going to happen to the thyroid gland? It's going to shout a little louder, and it's going to make more, and it's going to say, you're not listening to me. And it's going to make more hormones to make the ovary make estrogen. But the ovary can't make the estrogen. So then what happens to the thyroid? The thyroid gets tired and it shuts down, or it becomes inflamed. So either one can happen. And it's because the thyroid has been trying to instruct the ovaries, and the ovaries are not listening. And remember, we have this negative feedback loop that tells the body when to stop. So the thyroid is looking for the estrogen as a sign to stop making the hormones to stimulate estrogen. So when the estrogen goes up, the estrogen levels being normal, is a signal for the thyroid to stop stimulating the ovaries. But guess what? That signal never happens. So because that signal never happens, women then end up having thyroid dysfunction. And so a lot of times I see women come in with thyroid issues in that perimenopause and early menopause phase because their body is not handling the transition well. Now, in a case like that, HRT might actually be a good choice because it helps me stop the thyroid before it fails and totally collapses and shuts down, because you have the autoimmune thyroid disease. You can reproduce antibodies against your thyroid to attack your thyroid. You can have a hypo or hyperthyroidism that also happens there. So any one of those things I don't want to say life-threatening, but totally disrupts your life. If you know anybody with hypo or hyperthyroid, they'll tell you how distressing it can be because it affects literally every part of your body: hair, skin, eyes, muscle, bone, everything is affected by thyroid. So in a woman like that, where I see those early signs, I may jump on some HRT because I think risk to benefit is better. I stabilize her thyroid to help her deal with everything else later on than let her thyroid shut down. And now I'm dealing with two problems. Make sense? Right. So again, we have to think about things holistically, right? And how the body works together to support all of this. All right. We talked about heart disease in women, and we talked about that. And one of the things I want to mention as well, because I was talking about heart disease, and well, Coach Jason, I'm sure you've mentioned this already, but we all know the difference between visceral fat and subcutaneous fat, right? So we know that a lot of women, as they go into menopause, they said, like I just said, they find out they just get flabby. That's the description they would use. They just get flabby. They may not necessarily gain weight, but they will find that they're flabby. All right. And when we look at fats, there are two types of fat. You have the visceral fat, which is the fat that's sort of around the organs. And then we have the subcutaneous fat. Now, what is the purpose of fat? I mean, before we even start talking weight loss, we have to ask, why is the fat there in the first place? Okay. We have to remember that fats can essentially be an organ. Because what is the purpose? Fat is a storage. Okay. So what is the fat storing? It could be storing energy. It could store hormones. It could store toxins. It could store chemicals that the body is just waiting to, process. It could store metabolically active tissue. It could itself be a metabolically active tissue. Okay. So when we talk about fat, fat is, we want to think of fat as being negative, but it's vital for life, right? We must have fat. So here's the issue. Belly fat in a 20-year-old woman with a waist circumference of 45, I'm just using a random number, 45 inches. So she's clearly over where she should be. In a 20-year-old woman is not chemically the same as belly fat in a 50-year-old woman, same 45 inches. Why? Because in a young woman, that fat is going to be primarily storage of energy. That's overeating, bad habits. But in a woman in menopause in her 50s, she's going to have tons of toxins because that's decades of toxins, right? That's going to be fat, okay, some fats. It's going to be a lot of fluid because we just talked about menopause and the fact that the fluid distribution gets disrupted during menopause because of the estrogen levels changing. So a lot of that is going to be fluid. And I tell people a good exercise for all the women, well, I guess women and men, just feel your fat. We all have fat. So feel like your arms, right? And feel the fat in your arms. Feel the fat in your breast tissue. Feel the fat in your love handles. Feel the fat in your belly. And what do you notice? Feel the fat in your legs. Does the fat feel the same everywhere? Does the fat in your arms feel the same as your breast tissue fat? Or your leg fat? Or that belly fat? The fupa, like they like to call it? Does it feel the same? No, it doesn't. And why doesn't it feel the same? Because we don't store fat across the board and it doesn't contain the same components across the board. So fat in my arms is going to predominantly be energy. Fat in my legs is going to be predominantly energy. Fat around my midsection, that's not energy. Because where's that fat coming from? That's a direct spillover from the omentum, which is coming directly from the liver. So if I'm going to store toxins in my fat, guess where I'm going to store it? I'm going to store it in the belly fat, right? So you'll say, okay, I want to lose weight, I'm going to exercise, but that fat doesn't budge because it's not that kind of metabolic fat. It's not brown fat. It's toxic fat. And that's fat that's not going to shift unless you detox. Yeah? So if we feel that fat in that fupa area, so that lower belly, when women talk about the belly hanging, and you feel that fat there, what does that fat feel like as well? It actually feels more like your breast tissue fat. Women, we agree? When you feel that fat, that density of the fat in that fupa area that kind of hangs, it actually feels more like your breast tissue. Why? Because it's a mixture of that fluid and glandular type fat that is actually metabolically active. That fat is fat that's actually making hormones. That's why it feels the same or similar. So fats can actually make estrogen. So think about it. I like the simplicity of it. Think about it. You have a woman in menopause that's deficient in estrogen, and she has midsection fupa fat that can make estrogen. Why would her body get rid of it? Your body's very logical. Like, it's so simple and straightforward. So her body is going to adapt and say, no, 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 no. I need this bit of fat because that's my only estrogen source to help keep my levels semi-okay. So why would I get rid of it? Are we following that? So in a menopausal woman, we want to think telling a 20-year-old to go exercise and you'll lose your belly, and they do. And then we tell a 50-year-old one, go exercise, you'll lose the belly. Uh-uh, don't work so. Because it's a completely different kind of fat. And the fat now has a different role. So the fat has gone from being this basic element in the body to now being a critical, vital part of the body's functioning. So unless you adapt your body to compensate for that, that fat isn't going to disappear. Unless you create a little more hormonal balance, that fat isn't going to disappear, is it? It now is gone and it's elevated itself. It's now precious fats. It's no longer storage. It's now an organ. And what's going to drive that as well? So what's the hormone that drives um, visceral fats? It's actually cortisol, right? So visceral fat is driven by high cortisol, right? And again, the fat driven by cortisol is going to be a different kind of fat to the fat driven from overeating, which is going to be different to fat driven, which is, let's say, brown fat, which is more like to protect the body and for, warmth, which is going to be different from fat driven for toxins. Okay. So in any woman, particularly peri and menopausal, that's trying to lose fat, you have to ask yourself, what drove that fat there in the first place? And so for women who are highly stressed, working 9 to 5, they're working 40 plus hours a week. They're working 2 jobs to pay the bills, menopause kicking them down and they're just low energy, they're not sleeping, they're doing all these things. They're driving that visceral fat with that high cortisol. And what is the other thing that's happening? So the estrogen is dropping. Estrogen, so remember we have fight or flight response, okay? So let's just take a little backtrack. Estrogen is driving us to be female and to be good, to be healthy. Cortisol is driving that fight or flight response. It wants quick action. It's not your day-to-day thing. It's, just that response there. So if estrogen is dropping, what do we think is going to happen to the cortisol? It's going to go up, correct? Why is it going to go up? Because estrogen dropping creates a panic in your body. Remember that cycle that we talked about where we showed the dip in estrogen as part of your cycle. So remember when I was talking about this and I said, guys, you could look up all these various things. I want to give you information that helps you apply the cycle to your life. When that estrogen starts dropping, those changes are your high stress, is your high stress area then in a cycle. Because even though it's a natural dip, it's still going to create the same cortisol response in your body. What happens when your cortisol goes up? You stop sleeping. Well, yeah. So high cortisol definitely disrupts sleep. So if you think all the adrenal fatigue symptoms, cortisol is driving all of that. Your hair falls out, fertility decreases, because your body doesn't want to reproduce if you're fighting for your life, right? So all those things start going down. And then what happens? You start to pack on fat for a rainy day, right? Because now your body's thinking, fight or flight, I need extra energy in case I have to get going, right? So it starts to pack on a different kind of fat. And what's the problem with that kind of fat that's driven by cortisol? That's the insulin resistant fat. Why is it insulin resistant? Because that fat that your body is laying down in times of stress should only be unlocked by severe stress. Does that make sense? The key to that can't be an everyday key. So you have your money in the bank and you have your everyday account and then you have a safety deposit box. You can't be going in that safety deposit box every day. That's where you have your regular bank account for. So you have your regular fat, my arm fat, all this fat that my body's going to be, that's my everyday fat. But that cortisol-driven fat is my safety deposit box fat, right? So it's only a different scenario is going to trigger my body to be able to use that fat, okay? And again, this is where we talk about the difference between, again, a woman in her 20s that wants to lose weight and it's easy for her to do that, and a woman who's menopausal or perimenopausal and she is fighting for her life. She's gymming every day. Listen, she's eating as clean could be, and she's not seeing the results. All right? We have to think differently about menopause and what's really happening behind the scenes. And by understanding the mechanisms, you can understand how it applies to you and how to adapt, building your stack, like I keep saying, to know how to modulate. So if I have a 50-year-old woman, she's lots of belly fat, she has fibroids, and she still has heavy periods, and she's coming to me, I'm not going to have her, I'm not going to send her to you, Coach Jason, to train every day. I'm not, right? Why? Because we have to reset a whole lot of things for her body to be responsive to that. Because what's going to happen if I send her to you and she trains every day? She's already metabolically weak. She has high cortisol. Exercise is going to make her cortisol worse, which is going to lock her fat up even more. Her muscles can't recover with high cortisol, so her recovery time is going to be even longer. She's not going to be eating because she's so stressed. We know she has fibroids, and that's also stress-driven. We know that, right? And she's probably under-eating, right? Because that happens with most menopausal women. They always under-eat. They just never have time. years of bad habits. She needs to detox, okay? So if I have her training every day, she's going to feel worse. She's going to be breaking down muscle, unable to repair it because she's not getting enough protein. She's not getting the rest in her cycle. Her cortisol is still high. We're driving the cortisol even higher with the muscle tissue breakdown. Her hormones are still unbalanced. What are we doing? So for that type of woman, my first goal is to get her eating 3 solid meals a day. I'm going to double or triple her calorie intake. Why? I'm trying to drive her metabolism up. I want her body to be safe and feel like it has enough food, energy. It's not starving. So I don't care if she gains 10, 15, 20 pounds during that phase because I'm driving metabolism. So when she does start to exercise, her body feels safe to repair the muscle and build new muscle because it knows it's not starving. I want to get that cholesterol down. I want it to exercise to the point of she's now tired, so she's sleeping better. So when she starts to sleep better because she's actually tired, that cortisol is going to come down. She's going to repair the muscle now because I'm making sure she's getting her 1 gram per kg of protein. And she's going to start that from the get-go first thing in the morning, right? I'm going to work on the gut, right? She might be a good person I might add melatonin to because now I get gut support and I get sleep support, right? Now she has a fibroid, so we know we have estrogen dominance there. So I know I'm going to cut out certain foods, right? So when we look at the holistic picture, now we kind of understand the struggles of the postmenopausal, the struggles of the perimenopausal woman, and that is going to help us with doing. So one of the things I also like with that is if you want to deal with the I'm seeing something pop up there. Right. If you want to deal with that high cortisol fat, that insulin resistant fat. What is the best way to do that? So it's a combination of things. And this is where I would then incorporate things like intermittent fasting, but strategic intermittent fasting. Because intermittent fasting, remember we spoke about it, it's not okay for women all the time at all points in your cycle. So I'm going to have them fast maybe for 2 or 3 days at a particular point in your cycle. And the rest of the month you eat normal. There's a lot of research on like the fasting mimicking diet. So that's kind of what I try to replicate a little bit. And usually you're fasting for 3 days, 4 days, 5 days, however you can manage. And that's it for the month. So strategic fasting to unlock the cortisol resistant, also I should say the cortisol driven fat. And then you're back to building muscle to work on your baseline, if that makes sense. And then you kind of keep rotating that way. So you keep feeding the body and fasting strategically. Men, however, can fast. So Coach Jason, if you wanted to intermittent fast every day, you could go ahead and do that. Like testosterone is going to keep your muscle mass intact and you're not going to have any problem fasting like that. But because for women, our cycle have points where we are so calorie dependent, like we need to have those calories for the hormones to function and for the cycle to work. And those there are points where, or days I should say, where you should not be fasting. You should be getting your calories in. So being strategic about doing intermittent fasting is one of the common things that I have to challenge women with because everybody's in this whole hype. Yeah, you should be fasting, you should be in. And I agree, fasting is great. And like I said, it's one of the only things that helps with that type of resistant fat. But like I keep saying, it has to be done strategically. Yeah, strategically. Um, let's stop. Well, let me stop there. We could probably see, unless you want to add something to what we talked about, Coach, and then we could probably see if we have any questions from anybody.
No, I think we did an excellent job. So we could just see if we have any questions now. But I think it did a very excellent job. So guys, if you have any questions, just drop your questions in the chat, or you can raise your hand. We'll unmute you, and then we'll go from there. No, I know you're a great teacher most of the times, most people don't have questions, but for the benefit of the doubt, we'll just put that question out there. If you have any questions, let it be known. All right. Well, it seems like you did an excellent presentation and the clarity was 100%. So there's no questions here.
So let's do a quick. How much time we have? Oh, it's after 9. Okay. Maybe one of the days we could get somebody who doesn't mind sharing their history and maybe put ourselves on the spot in terms of building a plan. Because I think sometimes the challenge is, they have all this information and they're not quite clear in terms of how to apply the information to their everyday life, right? So again, if I have a 20-year-old with PCOS and maybe heavy periods, but they're regular, and she has a BMI of 35 and she's acne, you know, what am I going to do? Where do I start, right? And I would literally start with whatever bothers her the most. So if that girl comes and says to me, yeah, doc, is the acne that's bothering me, she's 20 something, she's really into makeup and whatever. I will start treating her acne first. Why? Because that builds the mental, you know, mindset of, okay, I'm getting somewhere with this. I would have her do some blood tests. What am I looking for? I'm looking for anemia. I'm going to look for thyroid issues. I will have to do an ultrasound to see how bad the PCOS is, right? And then we're going to start dealing with the next step. So, what's the diet going to look like? So, she has PCOS, so that's estrogen dominant. So, we talked about this. What's the first step we're going to do? We're going to add the fiber. So, her diet plan is going to be probably fiber first thing in the morning, right? I'm going to make sure she does some vegetables. She can do the grated carrots with every meal. Um, she can do, I'm not a huge fan of, like large salads for women because we tend to have poor digestion and it tends to be not well tolerated. So I tend to say, like, just grate a little carrot and have it there. Don't do salad as a meal all the time because when you're in that state, it just doesn't work well. Men, again, this doesn't apply. So men could get chow down on that salad and they'll be fine. We're talking women specifically here with challenges. Now, a woman who has no issues, no imbalance, good gut health, you chow down on your salad, that's fine. But we're talking about women with issues here, so that doesn't apply. So not all raw is good for you. So this girl now, so we're gonna have her do her fiber first thing. We're gonna have her protein intake go up. We're going to have her do, let's say she is anemic, so her high iron foods. I know we like to use things like nettle. I love raspberry leaf tea. So a simple regime, which we do in our house, we make a huge pot of raspberry leaf tea. It's in the fridge. Everybody pours a cup. You're warm it, you sweeten it, you drink it. So a good way to start her day could be she wakes up in the morning. She has a raspberry leaf tea. She has a high fiber breakfast. Um, and she takes maybe an iron supplement. She has her normal lunch, and for lunch, maybe she wants to do a dim, or maybe she wants to do another formula like the nattokinase, serrapeptase kind of formula to help break down in the nighttime or in the morning time. And then maybe with dinner, I'm going to have her do definitely a calcium magnesium supplement. If she's tired, I'm going to add a B vitamin. So we're going to keep it nice and basic. When that settles and we see the difference in a period in terms of her period symptoms, now we might want to add her exercise. And coach, you might want to say what type of exercise might be best for her based on her body shape and her body size and really her goals at that point in time, right? So for her exercise routine should really be, I would say, no more than 3 days a week. And I think during her period, she takes the break because she doesn't want to stress her body out during her period cycle. Now, people say, oh, push through, push through, push through. Again, for a woman who has no medical issues, push through. But if you do have issues, that's not the time to push through. You really want to back off and allow the body time to heal. You don't want to stress and redirect too much of that blood around the uterus to work on healing the muscle. We want to give that protein, we want to give that healing to the uterus while it's shedding its lining, right? And let that heal and regenerate. I don't want to be pushing and now the body has to redirect all that, blood and healing components and whatever to the muscle tissue that you just damaged, lifting heavy, right? So I would probably restrict her workouts to maybe 3 times a week or twice a week, maybe in some women who I don't think it is. And, be targeted, focused exercise, a lot of resistance training because we want to build muscle mass here. It's not so much about cardiovascular health, right? So that would be my approach in a case like that. So, I mean, out of the tons of supplements, you pick 2 or 3. So you're always adding some kind of herbal tea, I think, as your first part. You want to have the fiber in, and then you pick and choose your supplements based on the priority there. Now, if it's fibroids, for instance, then again, the enzymes would be more important. So the serrapeptase, nattokinase would be on top of my list, because you want to break down fibroid tissue. Fibroid tissue, remember, is also stagnation. So in a person with fibroids, I don't necessarily want as much weight training. I want more cardiovascular because I want to get blood pumping, right? Because fibroids is a lot of stagnation, pelvic stagnation. The blood is sitting there. The fibroid is pulling that blood supply towards itself and feeding itself. I want to get that stagnation away from the uterus and outflowing towards the body, right? I want to work on gut health. So somebody with fibroids, my priorities are going to be gut health products first. All right. Want to get that gut and that inflammation away from the gut. My exercise routine will be more focused on cardiovascular exercise, thrown in with a little weight thrown in, of course, as a holistic picture, but focus on getting the blood moving. Things that boost nitric oxide will be excellent in a case like that with fibroids as well. And that's going to support her system in that way, right? So when we think about it, I like to think about it in stacking it strategically. It's not just one size fits all. You can't take all the supplements because I remember you did that 2 weeks ago. And that was a lovely chart that you did on the whiteboard, listing all these things that we can take. But the reality is we can't take everything. So we really have to be strategic about the mix that we do. So like for me personally, when I do raspberry leaf tea, which is a fantastic supplement, I would always add ginger to mine. I tend to be on the sluggish digestive side. So I want to add warming herbs because of more cooling. That makes sense and it makes you more constipated. So I want to always add get constipation with my raspberry leaf is in what combinations you should use. And then you work out your supplements based on what your priorities would be. If your blood count is low and that's the priority, that's where your focus needs to be. So your diet isn't so much about the calories, it's about which foods are going to build that up. I need the vitamin C, I need the iron in my diet. What is that going to look like in my diet, and what is going to be my calorie intake for the day based on that? And that's how we going to build this individually for each individual person. So don't look at the information as being so overwhelming. Of course, if you need more guidance, then get a professional to help you with the guidance, right? If you want to pick and choose. But that's how you have to think about it strategically when you're going to decide from the long list, what supplements do I take? What teas do I drink? You don't try to do everything one time.
Well said, Doc. Well said, Doc. Well, thank you so much. I think I could get some ladies for you with specific conditions because I'll be a good to bring on the point too. I'll let you know when so that we could plan for that. And I'll brief them as
Yeah, so
well
if we
with the
get somebody,
conditions.
I think
And then,
I think if we could get somebody and we'll just let them unmute their mic and we could ask them specific questions. And so as we ask the questions, then we could talk about the specific supplements and stuff to give people a better idea of how to apply it. Because sometimes the list could be a bit, you know,
true,
daunting.
true. I agree. I agree. So I will work on getting those for you. And then once I have them, I'll try to get one in before menopause, perimenopause, menopause, and so you have like the whole spectrum to counsel. Yeah. Well, thank you guys. Well, thank you, Dr. Diane, so much for coming on again tonight. Now, I normally watch the participants, and normally when you on, participants will stay constant. So that's why I don't rush you to stop. Normally, when you see numbers going down, they kind of pull the plug. But in your case, you stay constant. So the thing is that yes, I like to finish early. I like to finish in a quick time. But even as one person said, they watched many menopause webinars before, they never had it broke down like this. And so the fact that persons are staying on, it means that there is a thirst for the information and you are quenching it. So for me to pull the plug would be to, further exacerbate the problem. So I normally like to leave it until, you have gotten it out and the persons are there responding, and then we go from there. Now, guys, this is also available on the Evesham Sda YouTube, because I know there's a lot of information. You probably want to go back to it. In the future, we're going to put them on podcast style, so you could pick them up on the different podcasts like Apple Podcasts and so forth. So while you're driving to work, you can listen to it. You can listen to Dr. Dian doing this presentation in an audio format, and it always in repetition is the key to learning. Now, that being said, let us pull the plug. I know Dr. Dian has 33 minutes prior to her sleep time, which is 10 o'clock. So we'll not try to impede on that. I know you ladies also have your sleep. I know we have persons here have a 5:30 a.m. workout tomorrow, so they don't want to cut in that either. So let us just bow our heads for a word of prayer, and then we're going to bring the curtains down. Dear loving and kind Father, we just want to thank you, Lord, for the wealth of information that was shared here tonight. We just want to thank you, Lord, for your blessings and your wisdom. We especially want to say a special thanks for Dr. Dian, always making herself available to be a service to your people here on this channel, and really sharing her knowledge and helping them to navigate this rough period. We just ask that you may continue to bless and expand her territory, and continue to bless her ministry so that she can reach worldwide souls for you through the health message. And we just ask that you may continue to be with her, even her local office here in Trinidad. We thank you, Lord, for this platform. And we thank you, Lord, for this ministry. Thank you for the work that you have been doing. Thank you for the souls that have been blessed. We're hearing the testimonies day after day. And so we just want to thank you for the mighty work that you are doing. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, everyone. Thank you again for being here tonight. We will see you guys next week, same time, same place, and the topic will be revealed. Sometimes we like to reveal the topic in a week in advance, but we normally would assess to see what happened here and then see what's the next logical topic. So that's why sometimes we take a little while to drop the next topic, right? So we'll just keep that in mind. If I get these persons ready for next week, I think that will be a fitting continuation series to this, because now it will be theory this week, and then next week will be the practical application in real life women. So I think I'll try and get that sorted out for next week. But if I don't, then whenever we get it done, we'll go from there. Anyway, you guys take care. Dr. Dian, you now have 32 minutes to bedtime. I know I need to give you some red screen time, blue light off, wind down time. And for all of you other ladies, Ronelle, 5:30 tomorrow morning. I know we have the carnival festivities in St. Vincent, but thank God the workouts are online, so it wouldn't affect you. You don't have to drive through traffic. Just put your Zoom on and we'll see you there. For our members from the Evesham Sda Church, do enjoy the downtime tomorrow. Rest and recover, as Dr. Dian said. And we'll take it from there. Take care and God bless. Oh, Doc, you'll have to end the meeting, eh? You're the host.
Sorry, say again?
You will have to end the meeting. You're the host.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, see me had things now.